Hello everyone, I have a special little drawing trick for you today. You'll need some type of string or yarn and give yourself a nice long piece of it. And you'll need some tape. And what I'm going to do is take this piece of string and I'm going to tape it down somewhere. You can tape it inside of your picture plane or you can tape it outside of your picture plane. I'm going to do it outside of the picture plane. And put like right here, it looks good. I'm going to make sure that this is securely down. What you can do is take one end and tie it. Just putting a little knot over here so that when I pull on it, it's sort of stuck under that knot. And you'll want to make sure that you don't pull it too tough, just enough. All right, so then now I have this mobility of this tool or this piece of string throughout my entire picture plane. Now, last week we talked about linear perspective, or one-point perspective, where all the lines converge. Not all the lines, but all the converging lines meet at a point. So this is a nice little fun tool so that you can be a little bit more abstract in your exploration of the lines. So I'm going to now go ahead. So we have been using our circle, our ellipse, our eggs, our squares, rectangles, triangles, cones. So now I'd like you to play with this trick to see if you can now sort of create an abstract drawing. You can see I can line that right up, and then continue on. Let's see, let's create a cone shape. All right, so maybe the lines would converge back to that point. So in this example, we are imagining that our point of perspective is outside of the picture plane. Last week, we put the point of perspective in our picture plane on horizon line. Here, the point is outside of the picture plane. And again, let's see, so if this was a cone shape, maybe we'd see the top of this here, and all these lines would converge back to that point. Maybe there is and who knows if you'd really see all of that. This is an extreme angle that I have employed here, so maybe you would see all of that. And maybe you can decide that there's a light source somewhere. I am imagining that the point of perspective is over on this side, so maybe I'll imagine that the light source is coming down from this way. So what that would mean is the light would come down this way, objects would be lit up, have a sense of light, and then would move into the shadow as it moves away from the light. And maybe these objects would have a shadow. Let's see if this light was coming in a dramatic way over here. This thing would probably extend out. All right, and now I don't want to just leave it. I want this to be a little bit abstract, so I'm going to overlay. So let's imagine now that I am thinking about a rectangular shape in my composition. That would mean that this line Oh, and look at that, it's almost like a straight line. It dips slightly, but it was almost like a straight line. But this line down here would have an extreme angle for our point of perspective. Again, light is coming this way. Maybe this plane is turning away from the light. And I'm making it so that you can see through the elements. Maybe I want to put another, maybe I'll put a pyramid of sorts, pyramid shape. That would bring my lines of perspective back that way. And maybe I want to open this up. At any point in time, you can change where the light source is coming from in your picture. All of a sudden, you can decide the light's coming from this way or another way. And there doesn't always have to be just one point of perspective. I'm just building and creating an image here, just playing with this idea of one point perspective and incorporating some of the shapes we have been talking about. There's another line here. Maybe I'll have a little rectangular shape here. You see how I'm using the string to make sure that all of my lines are moving in that point of perspective that we were talking about. Let's lift this up. This is a good place to talk about, oh, you know what, I decided that that line would be there, but it's not really that interesting and it kind of flattens it out. Why don't I lift that line up? See if that makes it a little bit more dramatic. And it does slightly. It creates another sort of dip or angle that's a little bit more interesting than that flat line that we had. All right, so this is sort of interesting, and maybe, like I always say, maybe I want to add some sort of marks of interest, just sort of mark making to make me happy, not necessarily following this line of perspective, but mark making just for the heck of it. Maybe there's some shadows happening. If you want there to be some shadows. Play with some shadow work. Playing with the values. You see how you could easily apply this to any kind of drawing, a real drawing, or a realistic drawing, I meant to say. A realistic drawing versus an abstract drawing. I'm just playing. Maybe I want there to be some lines through this dark patch. Remember, I always say there are tools, but no rules. So however you can make your drawing look interesting or cool. Going in and just pulling out some lights. really allowing intuition to play a part in this. Now that I've drawn a bunch of lines and a bunch of shapes, I'm now just asking myself what would look interesting. And at any point in time, you can lift this piece of tape up, piece of string, and maybe put it in another place. And you can start to draw other shapes that are in this line of perspective. So there can often be more than one perspective, one point of perspective. There could be more than one point. So in this first example, we took all of our converging lines to this point that was over here. Now we've moved our string. Now I can add other shapes. Maybe I have a square rectangular shape happening down here in the picture plane. And I can now take this line and create these converging lines to that point. Take it right out of the picture plane. It's okay. You can cross or change the direction of your lines to make it look like there are other points of perspectives, other sources of depth to employ. Not everything always has to go in the same direction. And there doesn't even really need to even be a shape attached to the lines. It can just be the lines themselves. Sort of moving this. Gotta make sure that tape is really secure so you get a nice clean. And then when we do this, have these various lines of perspective happening in our pictures, we can go back and now add other elements within these spaces, maybe some circular elements on this line of on these lines of perspective, and see how I'm getting them smaller and smaller. That will help create depth. Right? See how it just feels as though these things are moving back in space. See, I'll do some up here too. Maybe I eventually turn these guys into spheres just to help create more and more space in this picture. Let's see. Remember, the light is coming from this direction, but again, the light can all of a sudden come from this direction if you want. You can change the sense of where the light is coming from. That's the greatest thing about abstraction, is that there are ways that we can manipulate spaces that you wouldn't be able to manipulate if you're playing with realism. I'm just creating a sense of light and shadow on these spheres. Imagining that the light source is now coming from this angle. And we have been drawing a few drawings now, creating a few drawings now. Hopefully you're discovering some interesting ways to get marks onto the page, how to create a little light and space and shadow in your drawings. And now, as we continue to move forward, creating a sense of depth. And perspective is one way. And as I have said, there's more than, you can employ more than one point of perspective. There could be several points of perspective in your drawing. Just giving these guys a little sense of a highlight on here to help make them feel a little bit more alive, a little more awake. And again, sometimes just go right back to your intuition of what you think looks good, what would be interesting. Not necessarily where's the light coming from, if my lines are in perspective, if you know I have all the shapes, am I working with all the shapes? What would just look interesting to you with the darks and the lights and the shading in the spaces? There's no wrong way. You can't go wrong. And the more you play and search and try new things, the more you'll discover. All right, again, if you want, you can add some more stuff with your lines. If you want, if that excites you. Maybe look at the lights. Are there any places where you need to employ more light? Or any more marks? Are there any places where you need to bring in some of your own mark making? Just to visually activate an area in an interesting way. All right, so I think I'm done with this. I'm just going to pull this right out of the way. And I think I want to soften this. I like this ominous square here. In those spaces, maybe this has a little shadow on it. I want to lighten this plane up. So now I'm just playing with these elements of design, really, with lines, shapes, marks, lights, darks, shadows. When I'm pulling out and erasing areas, I'm beginning to play with negative shapes. So when we draw, like for instance, this is like a positive shape, but these other areas that aren't necessarily specific shapes are negative shapes, or the space or shape around objects. By pulling out some of these lights, I'm accentuating some of these negative shapes or spaces, giving them more interest. So every part of the piece is important. Nothing's just sort of happenstance. Even this negative shape in here is sort of interesting. That was developed. So this negative shape, even these shapes here. And when you're composing an image, all of this stuff, when it comes down to it, matters. If these shapes in here are boring, then you can bet your drawing's going to be boring. So that may be something else that you're changing and adjusting, is these, not necessarily the square, the pyramid, or these circles. Maybe it's these negative spaces that need more attention or interest. All right, I'll see you all soon.